In the far north, where the wind sings through the trees and the snow can bury a man in silence, stories survive longer than footprints. They move in whispers, in the spaces between firelight and frost. Stories of something ancient, something watching. For centuries, the people of the boreal forests, Cree, Ojibwe, Algonquin, have spoken of a spirit that does not rest. It has no home, no name that can be safely spoken too often. But when hunger comes, when desperation takes root, they say it walks. The Wendigo, or Wendigo, is not merely a monster. It is a warning. A spirit of cannibalism, greed, and the madness that follows starvation. Some believe it stalks through the forest in flesh, its limbs too long, its mouth stretched wide. Others say the Wendigo is inside us, waiting for the cold to open the door. This is not just folklore. Across time and place, the Wendigo has left traces, in legend, in court records, in the minds of those who survived long winters, and those who didn't. This is a journey through the dark places of the northern soul, a place where survival has a price, and sometimes that price is humanity itself. This is the story of the Wendigo. In the winter of 1878, the Canadian frontier was a place of ice and silence. Endless forests, isolated trading posts, life balanced on a knife's edge, between hunger and survival, order and madness. From the north, a Cree man named Swiftrunner emerged from the wilderness, stumbling towards a Catholic mission near Fort Saskatchewan. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, but not starving. He had survived the brutal winter, alone. He told missionaries of a tragic tale, that his wife, children, brother, and a mother-in-law, all of them, had perished in the cold. That starvation had taken them, one by one. A familiar story in the Canadian Northwest. The priests offered him food, shelter, prayers. But soon, doubts crept in. Authorities visited his remote camp. What they found would stain the Canadian wilderness with horror for generations. Scattered bones, charred skulls, a pot still black with grease. Human remains, some clearly gnawed. A child's shoe, part of a jawbone beneath a tree. Swiftrunner confessed. Not only had he killed his family, he had eaten them, piece by piece, over weeks. Though a Hudson's Bay supply post had been within walking distance. Why? Why kill when survival was within reach? Swiftrunner claimed he had been possessed by a Wendigo spirit, that a dark voice had whispered to him through the trees, that a hunger, unnatural and overwhelming, had overtaken him. He said the Wendigo had spoken to him in dreams, that it laughed as he butchered those he loved, that he couldn't stop and didn't want to. His trial was short, the evidence irrefutable. He was sentenced to death. But what truly unnerved those present was his demeanour, calm, cheerful, as if the horror was behind him, or still inside him. On the morning of his execution, he reportedly joked with guards, smoked his pipe, walked to the gallows without resistance. Before the noose was tightened, he looked up to the sky and smiled. Swiftrunner's story wasn't just murder, it was transformation. A man consumed not by hunger alone, but by something older, something colder. The Wendigo, the elders say, waits for those who choose self over family, hunger over humanity. In In that forest, he made his choice. In the cold shadow of the Canadian wilderness, not all monsters are hunted with rifles. Some are battled with ceremony, songs, and spirit. This is the story of Jack Fiddler, a man feared by some, revered by others, and known among his people as a killer of Wendigos. Jack Fiddler was a shaman and a spiritual leader of the Sucker clan of the Ojibwe, who lived near Sandy Lake in what is now northwest Ontario. Born around 1839, he carried traditions passed down through generations: medicine, ceremony, and when he needed, destruction. Among his people, Wendigos were not fairy tales. They were real, and not just the towering ice spirits of lore, but people who become spiritually corrupted, who stood on the edge of transformation. These were not always strangers. Often they were kin, a cousin, a sister, a child, stricken with violent urges, muttering under their breath, consumed by hunger or madness. To the Ojibwe, this wasn't mental illness. It was a spiritual disease, a poison, one that could spread. And once someone crossed the line, there was no coming back. Jack Fiddler was called upon when a person became or was feared to be becoming a Wendigo. He did not act alone. The afflicted were often brought by family who begged him to release their loved one from the suffering and from what they might become. It is said he stopped at least 14 such transformations in his lifetime, some by ceremony, others more final. But to outsiders, these were not spiritual acts, they were murder. In 1907, Jack and his brother Joseph were arrested by the Canadian government, charged with murder, specifically for the death of a woman they believed was becoming a Wendigo. Her family had requested the act, but the Crown saw only a body and 2 old men with blood in their hands. Jack Fiddler tried to explain, but his language, his beliefs, the world he inhabited, were alien to those who now held the power. Before trial, he escaped into the woods and took his own life. Joseph, his brother, was brought to trial. He spoke broken English. The court called him a danger. He was sentenced to prison. He died 3 days before news arrived that he had been pardoned. To the outside world, they were criminals, but to their community, Jack and Joseph were warriors against a spirit of hunger, guardians of the line between survival and monstrosity. Jack Fiddler didn't kill out of hatred. He killed to protect the living and to release the suffering from what they feared they might become. In a world where the Wendigo walked in spirit and in flesh, sometimes the only cure was death. Even today, the forests keep secrets. In the winter of 2001, just outside of Fort Kent, Maine, a remote outpost where the United States bleeds into Canada, a group of hunters returned from the woods with more than frostbite. They brought a story that would haunt them for years. They were lifelong friends, raised in the north, men who tracked moose, fished ice-locked lakes, and lived through the worst blizzards the region could throw. The woods were home, but that night something felt wrong. It started with silence, not peace, but a void. The forest seemed to stop breathing. No wind, no snow, no movement. Then came a smell, a rot so foul it made one of them gag, like something had been dead for a long time. At first they thought it was a deer, tall, slender, but then they saw it stand, higher than any man, maybe 8 feet tall, no fur, just pale, grey skin. Its limbs were too long, The eyes, they said, reflected no light at all. The creature didn't approach, it circled, always just at the edge of their firelight, watching, not curious but deliberate, as if it knew them. The hunters broke camp before dawn. One left his rifle behind, another refused to speak for days, and though none of them were physically harmed, none of them ever returned to that stretch of forest again. The sheriff's report was brief. No evidence found. The men were described as sober, rattled but coherent. But over the following winter, whispers began. Other residents of Fort Kent reported strange events. A woman claimed something watched her from the tree line every night for a week. A snowmobiler said he found tracks in the snow, deep, human-like, but with claw marks. No animal matched the pattern. Some chalked up to black bears, others to stress. But a few elders from the region, when shown a sketch of what the men had seen, simply nodded. That's not a bear. That's not a man. That's something old. Something hungry. The town moved on, stories faded, but every few years, someone reports a shape in the woods, a scream without a source, footprints that end in the middle of a frozen field. Is it a spirit reborn? A modern Wendigo? A shared delusion carried on winter winds? Whatever it was, it's still out there. Some stories never make the papers. They're passed down from elder to child, written in the margins of missionary journals or hidden in letters never meant for public eyes. At the edge of Ontario's northern wilderness lies Lake Abitibi, a place of still waters, deep cold, and a history whispered more than spoken. In the early 1890s, French Oblate missionaries arrived to convert and settle Cree and Algonquin families living near the lake. Winter was hard that year, game had vanished, traps came up empty, but the people spoke of something walking in the forest, something that had returned. One family has disappeared, only the smoke of their fire remains. The others speak of Wetiko. The people will not go near their camp. According to records recovered decades later, 3 families living in the same trapline region vanished in a single season. The surviving community refused to search for them. When pressured, one elder told the missionary plainly, they were taken or they became it. Either way, they are not our concern now. Over the course of 2 winters, 7 people disappeared in that region. 3 were later found, skeletal, stripped of flesh, faces missing. One corpse was discovered inside the shelter that had been deliberately burned. There was no formal investigation, no arrests. When the priest inquired further, he was told not to interfere. The people had handled it. Years later, in 1921, an anthropologist interviewing Cree families at Moose Factory was told a story of a time when a group of cold-hearted ones had begun to change. The old people had seen the signs, silently weeping, long absences into the woods, refusal to eat cooked meat. They say one had already transformed, that it was killed by his brother. The other 2 were sent away, into the forest with nothing but a flint and a prayer. Some scholars dismiss the tale as folklore, but field notes from both missionaries and anthropologists align. Dates, names, locations, always the same stretch of forest near Lake Abitibi. Always in winter, always the word, Wendigo. The story never reached courtrooms or headlines, There was no trial, no confession, only silence, and the understanding among those who lived there that something had gone wrong. Even now, elders in the area speak cautiously about that time. Some won't fish near the southern edge of the lake. They say the land remembers. In the old world, justice wasn't always written down. It lived in story, ceremony, and silence. Sometimes, when the cold got too deep, when hunger began to bend the soul, a line was crossed. And once crossed, the only path forward was to disappear. In the 21st century, the Wendigo has taken on a new shape. It's become a monster with antlers, glowing eyes, and a hunger for blood. A fixture in horror games, movies, creepypastas. But this version is a stranger to its origin. The popular image of the Wendigo, a skeletal figure with a deer skull branching antlers, does not appear in Indigenous oral tradition. It is a product of artistic license, first popularized in horror fiction and fantasy art during the late 20th century. To the Cree, Anishinaabe, and other Algonquian-speaking peoples, the Wendigo is described as tall, emaciated, with glowing or ice-filled eyes, lips eaten away by hunger. It is humanoid, not animal, not a forest god, and never with antlers. The Wendigo is not a beast. It is a broken person. This misunderstanding deepens when stories of similar but unrelated beings are conflated with Wendigo legends. Creatures like the Skinwalker from Navajo tradition, a shapeshifter tied to witchcraft, or internet-born cryptids like the Rake and Slender Man. Even in online forums and YouTube channels, the term Wendigo is often misapplied to unexplainable sightings. Tall humanoid figures with glowing eyes, shrieking voices, and predatory behavior. But when you strip away the horror tropes and misused names, what remains is a reminder of how easily sacred stories become a spectacle. In shows like Supernatural and games like Until Dawn, the Wendigo becomes a villain to defeat, a cannibal cursed for violence. But the meaning is lost. The Wendigo was never about entertainment. It was about ethics. It warned against greed, against selfishness in the face of need, against becoming something no longer human in spirit, not just in body. Even in academia, the Wendigo has been misunderstood. Wendigo psychosis was once described as a rare mental disorder among northern Indigenous communities, a craving for human flesh and fear of becoming a cannibal. But many now argue this diagnosis was shaped more by colonial misunderstanding than clinical observation, an attempt to translate spiritual affliction into Western pathology. The Wendigo is not just what you become when you eat someone. It's what happens when you stop seeing others as worth saving. Today, the Wendigo is a hashtag, a Halloween costume, a forest cryptid. But among the communities where the story began, it's still something else. Not a monster in the dark, but the dark inside us. In every story we've told, Swift Runner, Jack Fiddler, Lake Abitibi, there is one constant. The cold. Not just the air, but in the choices people are forced to make. The Wendigo isn't only a creature, it's a threshold, a line you cross when survival becomes savagery, when fear replaces community, when hunger speaks louder than memory. To the First Nations of the North, the Wendigo was never just a beast. It was a boundary, a lesson, a name for what happens when we forget who we are to each other. Western science would later call it psychosis, myth, madness. But that language lacks what the old stories told. The understanding that spiritual illness is no less real than physical, and just as dangerous. Today, the Wendigo has been turned into a monster for movies and video games, antlers and snarls and jump scares. But its real power is quieter, older. It waits in the moment you choose yourself over someone else and don't look back. They say it still walks the woods, especially in deep winter. It doesn't rush, it waits. Because the Wendigo doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come to it. Thank you for watching this journey into the chilling legend of the Wendigo. We hope it left you with questions, thoughts, and maybe a chill or two. If you enjoy this exploration of folklore, history, and the unknown, consider subscribing. There's still much more waiting in the dark. Until next time, stay curious and stay warm.